All right, welcome to Module 3. Mike Stahl here again. Hope all is well. Hope you guys are enjoying the course so far. By the time you hear this, you'll be in this third module. I'm recording this on Thursday, November 12th, so you're knee-deep in Module 2 right now. Really enjoyed the discussions, the ones I've read through so far, and gotten to take a look at for Module 1. Thought you guys did a really nice job. Per the email I sent out earlier this week, I'm a little bit behind schedule. The timing of this course and a gigantic event that I do each year coincided, which is rare, but it happened this year. And that usually knocks about 3 to 5 days off my schedule where I'm just fully immersed in it, the Spirit of the Entrepreneur Awards. And thank you to Cassidy for sharing the newspaper article. I knew that it was going to be in the newspaper, but she forwarded that on to me. That was really cool to see the photo of it in print, since I only see stuff online anymore. And we had a great event. If you want to learn more about it, feel free to ping me. Happy to talk about it. But the real business at this time is Module 3. Got to get you going. Second module, you're going through the ideation process, or you've gone through the ideation process by the time you listen to this. And hopefully that went well for you. I know from talking to students in the past, pretty much every class I do, students talk about the ideation process being pretty difficult, actually, for most of us. And I would agree that it is a difficult process. I know with my undergraduate students, I teach them now, the way I teach the ideation process is they have to produce 100 ideas in their first iteration, and then they have to come back and do 50, and then they have to come back and do 25, and then they have to finalize with 10. So it's a pretty rigorous process, and it really forces them to get used to ideating, and that's really what this is all about. We're not expecting you to come up with superstar, incredible ideas, although that does happen, but it's really more about thinking about ideation, learning about it, going through it, kind of flexing those muscles, if you will, and getting used to it. I always tell students it's really, my goal is to get them to be comfortable with the process and to be engaged in the process, and hopefully that will lead to future ideation and better ideas. And because the reality is, and we'll talk about it more, and I talked about it in the ideation module, is that to really come up with good ideas, great ideas, you got to come up with a lot of ideas. And so hopefully that ideation process, you learn something from it. Innovation's hard work, and so I think that's true for all of us going through that. So Module 1 was really all about the people. Who are entrepreneurs? What makes them tick? Why do they do what they do? Because sometimes they do stuff that seems like it's odd to the society at large. Module 2 was the ideas. Where do they come from? Are they, and are they any good? And how do we know? And now for Module 3, we really want to shift gears. And if we've got these people doing things and they're running around with ideas, what's the process? How do they actually start businesses? How can we understand entrepreneurship as a process? And so that's really our focus here in Module 3. Not long ago, maybe 6-8 months ago, I read a really interesting article. And they talked about entrepreneurship being the development of the business from a ground up, coming up with an idea and turning it into a profitable business, something that's sustainable. And I was struck by its really simple definition. And the reality is execution and actually doing it and knowing how to do it and do it the right way, those are incredibly difficult things. And so I think a big part of what we want to take away in Module 3 is this idea that there's a lot of different ways to sort of slice the bread, if you will. I mean, there's a couple of different approaches, actually 3, that I'm going to go over in this process of this module to kind of introduce you to how startups look, what the process they use. And it's kind of interesting because I don't think I ever really thought of entrepreneurship as a process, but being exposed to a lot of writing, a lot of articles, it's made me appreciate that there actually is a process. And you go back, you've got the entrepreneur, like I said, you've got the idea, and it results in a business. And so I think what we want to do is dissect what that looks like. Back in 2001, when I got asked to teach this class, the very first class offered in the MBA program for entrepreneurship, I started digging around trying to figure out, what can we hang this class on? I mean, I can talk about my experience, I can talk about my friends and my colleagues' experience, but what do we know about the field? What if people studied about the field? And I asked around, and a couple people directed me to a book called New Venture Creation, which at the time, and I think still to this day, was an incredibly well thought out and executed and researched book on entrepreneurs and what they do. It's written by a man named Jeff Timmons, who in the field of entrepreneurship education is sort of like one of the original people that taught it as a subject. And Jeff, who unfortunately is no longer with us, had what he called the Timmons model. He was trying to make sense of it, like we all are. It's like, wow, what's going on here with this whole entrepreneurship stuff? I mean, we know people start businesses, but how? Why? What's going on? What's behind all this? So he tried to distill it down into a really, really simple, if you're looking at the screen, it doesn't look that simple, but it's kind of a really simple model that really consisted of 4 components. And he said that, a useful way of understanding this whole entrepreneurial thing is to create a model, visualize it, and see how the forces, what he called the forces, interact with each other, all these different components. And if you want to break down the model in a brief overview, it's really driven by the entrepreneur, the founder. At the bottom of the graphic, you've got the lead entrepreneur, the founder, the driving force, the person that's making this thing happen, the person you read about in Module 1, the person you watched videos about in Module 1. That's the person driving the process. We know that, right? So, but he said for this whole process, for a business to be started, there has to be a founder, there has to be an opportunity. So an idea that you have has to represent a business opportunity. And we're going to talk a little bit, more about opportunities consistently through the class, I think. But so there has to be this opportunity, and there have to be some type of resources in play, and there has to be a team of people, not just the lead entrepreneur, but there has to be a team of people involved, both perhaps internally and externally, that can help the founder create this venture. And so he said the model is you've got all these things working together, and really there at the bottom, the entrepreneur, the founder, is the one that has to balance it all. And oftentimes things are out of balance, and the founder has to try and find a way to balance it, to create a business and to grow it for it to be successful. And that the fundamental job of the founder is to assess the opportunity, to put together the team, to marshal the resources, and somehow balance those in a way that it all kind of comes together in the context of uncertainty, in the context of external forces, in the context of trying to execute a business plan. It's a really interesting, way to try and look at entrepreneurship. I've grown fond of extending that and saying, yes, there's a process, and I think it's really valuable to understand the founder, the team, the resources, the opportunity. But I've also said, become fond of, I guess more is where I'm headed, the fact that trying to find a product market fit. I mean, that's really what this all boils down to. You have an idea, it's a product or a service. Is there a market fit? Is there a customer in a market that needs this, wants this, gotta have it? And how do we know if there's an opportunity? And I think that leads us to 3 potential ways we can proceed. in terms of starting a business. And I'll back up and talk a little bit about really kind of what you need to do before that. But let's take a look at 3 different startup models that I think would be really interesting to introduce to you. All right, so here we go. First model, approach 1. This would be the most typical, this would be the one that has been taught probably the most widely at colleges, universities, articles written about it. I mean, basically what it boils down to is somebody comes up with an idea, and they would then write some form of a business plan. It could be a short business plan, it could be a long business plan. But the fundamental training, historically was, oh, you've got an idea for a business? Okay, you need to write a business plan. And then once you write the business plan, you develop the product or the service, and you secure the capital, and you start branding and marketing, and then you go out and you make this happen. You find the customers. And it's a really, really logical model, I guess, from that perspective. You got an idea. Let's see if there's, let's write a plan so we can make it happen. Let's produce it. Let's market it and sell it, and then the customer will buy it. What's wrong with this picture? Well, the reality is, while it is logical and it seems to make sense, as Steve Blank, who's involved with a concept called the lean startup, which we'll talk about in a little bit, he's fond of saying, no business plan survives contact with the first customer. In other words, you can plan, and you can plan pretty much in isolation, and you can develop a business, you can raise capital, you can produce a product, you can brand it and market it and go out and sell it. But what if the customer really doesn't want it? If your first contact with a customer is after that entire process, odds are, and it's probably a 50-50 proposition, that you've made the right assumptions and that you've hit upon something that customers really want, need, strongly desire. And so the most typical approach, I think, is fraught with some drawbacks. It could go right, and I think probably at least half the time it could go wrong, and perhaps even more than 50% of the time it could go wrong, because you're doing everything in isolation. You're making assumptions that your idea is really good, and it's a product or service that's really going to meet a market need. It's solving a pain point. It's addressing a want in the marketplace. And the problem is you're making a lot of assumptions, and you don't know until you go test them. And the problem is, even further, is that's chewed up a tremendous amount of time. And if you've raised capital, or let's say you didn't go raise capital, let's say you put, like many people do, they either withdraw money from their savings, they do a home equity loan, they take out some retirement funds, maybe even, further down the line, maybe they maxed out some credit cards because they're so confident this is going to work. And they go out and plan and do all this stuff, and then they hit the market and the customer doesn't buy it. Uh-oh, we have a problem. And by that time, you've invested all that time, money, energy, and things are going to get pretty hairy. So that's approach 1. That's the most typical. It's the one that's kind of historically resonated with people the most, and it's been taught the most at educational institutions and other places. This is the common model. So take it for what it's worth. I think there's some strengths and weaknesses to approach 1. Now let's go to approach 2. Now, this is a little bit different. This is the approach that I would call the all-in startup or the lean model approach. And this is, hey, we've got an idea. How do we know if our idea is any good? We're making some assumptions about this idea for the business we want to start. Let's talk to our potential customers. Let's go out and interact with customers. Let's not survey them. Let's not do anything but try and talk to them in a way that solicits feedback without coloring the process, and I'll describe that in a moment. We go out and we talk to customers. A colleague of mine at USC used to, in his course, he said to his students, until you've talked to 100 customers in the right way, you don't know anything about your business concept. You don't know whether it's any good. So we're kind of stepping back and saying the customer used to be at the end of the process. We made tons of assumptions about them and how they related to our business idea. And oftentimes, because a product or service emanates from a pain point we have, we think, well, if we have it, everybody else is going to have it. So this process, the second approach, what I would call the all-in startup, the lean startup model, it dials it back. It moves the customer up to the front end of the process and said, you don't have a business unless you have a customer. And I think that's worth repeating. You don't have a business unless you have customers. And customers, they don't buy products or services, they buy solutions to their problems or something that fills a really deep need that they have. So we bring the customer early on and we talk to them through open-ended. The best way is to do open-ended interviews in an informal setting so that they don't know that they're being sort of necessarily interviewed about your business. It's not, tell me, I've got this great idea for a business. Tell me what you think of it. They're going to give you what you want. Most people are going to tell you what they think you want to hear. Rare is the person that will give you the honest feedback. So you have to approach it in a way that's a little bit different. Quite honestly, that's a whole module in itself. I spend multiple sessions on that in one of my other courses that I do, where we spend a lot of time talking about how you actually construct customer interviews. But the key is you've got the idea, you go to the customers, you use their feedback to let you know whether the idea is any good or you need to make a left turn, or you're going to make some changes, you're going to pivot, it's going to refine it, they're going to tell you things you don't know or you didn't think about, and you're going to end up potentially with a product that's ready to take to market that you've already got a good idea after hundreds of interviews with potential customers. You feel like you've tested your assumptions and you're ready to go to the market, and now it's about branding, marketing, and selling to people that you're pretty confident will buy your product or your service. So that's approach 2. We just sort of dial it back and we say, you gotta have the customer's input first. If you don't, you've made assumptions that you have no way of knowing are true or not. Third approach, what I call, forgive me if you have sensitive ears, but this is an actual company, and I've read about this company. They're a company that does audio products, and since I'm a big lover of music and audio stuff, and I actually came from the audio industry, albeit a different part, avionics, I have a real strong affinity for audio stuff. And I ran across, I can't remember how, I was doing some kind of a web search for something, and I came across basically an online, it's not really a diary, it's a book, it's an online book that was constructed chapter by chapter by the founder of a company called Schit. SCHIIT, Schit. So I apologize if you have sensitive ears. But the founder of this company, basically, he and his partner had an idea for a new product and a new company. And their basic approach was, we've got a lot of industry experience. We kind of have a feel for what's going to work and what won't. And we're making some assumptions, but we have no way of knowing it, whether they're right or not. So we're going to do a quick and dirty test to see if our assumptions are correct. And if it flies, that's great. And if it fails, oh well. We're willing to take that risk. So what they did, they had an idea for a product. They came up with the product. They said, we think we can do it. They're both engineers. They could design it. They designed it. They put it together in their garage. And they basically said at the beginning, We're willing to put in $10,000 to make this thing go. We're going to put together enough products, like 100 of these products. That's what our $10,000 will buy us. Our labor is free. We'll put them together in the garage, in the spare bedroom, whatever it takes. But we've got this idea. We're going to build the product, and then we're going to go out and market it. And we think people will buy this. We think this is going to be a groundbreaking product. We think people this will resonate with them and they'll buy it. But if they don't, we'll be out $10,000. And, even though we'll have failed at it and we'll have lost $10,000, we will have enough of these left over, because people won't buy them, to give them for Christmas gifts, holiday gifts, for people for a number of years. We can shower our friends and family with leftover products because they're going to be a good product. If the market doesn't want it, well, oh well. So that was the shit model. They basically said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make a bet. It's like playing poker. They're saying we're willing to push a certain number of chips to the table, $10,000 worth of chips in this hand, because we think we got a good chance at winning. We're going to push them to the table, and it's a small bet. And if that bet pays off, wow, okay, the market accepts it. We can go back and build more. And then we can start thinking about our other ideas, our other audio product ideas, because we've got ideas for other things. And so they viewed this as kind of like a small bet they were placing. If you go back to the second approach, it's the same thing. They were, the all-in startup, the lean model approach is build, measure, learn. Build, measure, learn. Build a prototype, get feedback, measure the responses, learn, build it into the next prototype. Build, measure, learn. All in startup, similar to the ship model, although the ship model just basically says, hey, we've got X number, we're going to push these chips to the table, we're going to make a bet, and if it pans out, we're going to play another hand. And we'll keep playing as many hands as we can. It's a really interesting company. It's a really interesting model. It's worked incredibly well for them because they've taken off like a rocket over the last few years. A lot of interesting reading about that company. A lot of it's geeky audio type stuff, but a lot of it's really savvy business stuff. But that's the ship model. Build it, be willing to risk and lose what you've built, and then go from there. And if it works, you build on that. If it doesn't, you go back to the drawing board, or you just give up and go on and do something else. So for certain types of companies in their situation, it has worked really, really well. So those are the three types of approaches that I think are most typical out there, and I think it gives us an idea of how you would actually create something new, what kind of process you would look at in creating something new. There's certainly strengths and weaknesses to each of those different approaches. If I think I was pinned in the corner, I think I probably would resonate with either approach 2 or 3 mostly. That's kind of the way, not kind of, it really is the way that since I've been at Cal State, we've been teaching entrepreneurship to students, although we had a legacy of teaching business planning. And I think there's still a value to business planning. I think you have to think about execution and those kind of things. But I think as a startup model, I think moving the customers up and early into the process, or simply doing some really quick and dirty testing, guerrilla testing, if you will, which is kind of another way you could call a ship model. I think those both resonate with me personally more from a practical standpoint. And I think back to my experience in terms of developing new products and things like that and launching new ventures. Those are the ones that kind of resonate with me most. So for what it's worth, those would be good grist for the mill in terms of discussion. All right, shift gears just a little bit. Go back to your idea. How do you know if your business idea is any good? Well, there's a lot of questions you have to ask. I'm fond of saying that to know if your business idea is any good, you have to date it. And I don't know, I can't recall how many of you in the course shared the information, but I would imagine a fair amount of you are married. I'm married, and most of us went through some kind of courtship before we got married. And I think that's a really, valuable thing, because how do you know who your life partner is? Who's that person for you? Short of some kind of process that you vet them. You start with knowing what you want, what values you have, and what you're looking for. And then you test that out. You make some assumptions about people and you find out about them. You ask them questions, and that's the dating process. You date people to find out whether they're a fit with what you're looking for. And I think you need to do that with business ideas as well. You have to date them. Getting married after the first date, typically not a viable strategy in life. I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, yeah, I got married after the first date and we're, 30 years later, we're still together. It's usually not a good recipe for future success. Same thing with business ideas. I can't tell you how many people I've met that had a business idea and they just jumped in the water. How much planning did you do? Not really much, and they didn't even really think about it too much. They used the ship model to the extreme. And as a result, I'm not so sure it worked out that well for them. So having this dating process, being able to ask questions and those kind of things, I think is really, really important. And I look at it from a big picture overview of how do I know if any of my ideas are any good? I have sort of my own 5 big picture criteria I think about. And it starts with, there has to be a customer who needs what you will provide and is willing to give you some cash for it. They gotta, unless they're pulling out their wallet or their checkbook or their credit card, nothing's happening. So there's got to be a customer. There's got to be that person. You're meeting a need. You're solving a problem. Remember, people don't buy products or services. They buy solutions. And you have to get to the point where the best business ideas are those that have a customer that has an incredibly powerful migraine headache that is causing so much pain that they'll pay whatever for it. If it's just a dull little throb in their head, it's not that bad. I can get by. You want to find those customers who need what you're providing and are willing to pay for it. It's an incredible migraine problem that you're solving. Second piece of the puzzle is, you got to have those customers, and hopefully, if you're using the all-in startup model, you've talked to a lot of them, and you've got a good sense of what their problem is, and that it really is a migraine problem, and you've got a good solution, and they think it would be viable. You've got those customers, but there has to be a lot of those customers. There has to be a reachable, attractive market. It's a large group of customers. If it's a small group of customers, that's a niche business. That's not bad, but if you're trying to look at long-term sustainability and success, you really want to find a large group of customers, one that's preferably growing, that gives you growth opportunities with your business. The third criteria I use is it has to have a model that can support the company, a business model. And what we're talking about, we're going to talk about business models in a little more depth here in a few minutes. It has to have a way of making money that can support the company. You have to be able to generate revenue, and it has to be a model that works. It has to be a model that is easy for the customers to interact with you. So we'll talk a little bit more about business models in a moment. This came up in, I'm hoping, I've had so many conversations lately. I think this came up in the Module 1 discussions. So a few people touched on this idea of timing and luck. And I apologize, I can't remember who, with 43 students, I have a hard time remembering who came up with some of those comments. But I thought they were incredibly insightful, that luck and timing do play a real significant chunk of what happens. There's a lot of stuff we can do, but timing's got to be right from both a market and a personal perspective. If you're not ready, if you're not in a stage of life where this is a good thing to be doing, or you're not in the right frame of mind, That's a timing issue. If you're too far ahead of the market, Apple Newton was a great example of a product that was ahead of the market. If you're not sure what the Apple Newton is, go look it up. An incredibly interesting personal digital assistant back in the early 90s that really was the forerunner of what became the smartphone. But it was ahead of its time. We didn't have the infrastructure. The technology wasn't quite there. So timing is incredibly important for any aspect of life, but particularly with businesses. The last piece, I think, is you have to have the expertise and are mentally ready for the challenge. Expertise meaning you've got some domain experience. If you don't have the experience, you've gone out and acquired some of the experience, or you've done a deep dive to learn more about the business and the industry. And or you've created a team that has filled your knowledge gaps. I mean, good entrepreneurs know what they don't know. And if you don't know everything that you need to, you go out and acquire that knowledge from some other sources. You either get it. Think back to October Sky. Homer didn't have the expertise to do everything to build rockets, but he learned some of it, and he also got access to people that had expertise. And that's really, really powerful. That's the piece of it. And then the mentally ready. Creating a business is incredibly challenging. It's incredibly draining, and you have to be ready for that. It's in no amount of words can describe what it's like, and you have to be really resilient. And I think you have to have a lot of grit, and a lot of that is mental toughness to make it through the ups and downs of the business. Garner Holt, who I'm incredibly fond of, once told my students, he said, they said, what are one of your keys to success? And he said, he goes, I never let myself think that I'm as successful as I am when things are going well, and I never get down when things are going really, really badly. He goes, I never believe in either opposite ends of the spectrum, that we're superstars and we're dogs. He says, I always try and take a balanced, even keel mentally to approaching my business. And he said, I think that kind of balanced mental approach has really, really helped me. So I think those are the 5 criteria. You got to have a customer. You've got to have a reachable, attractive market. You've got to have a really well thought out, defined business model that can support the company. In other words, bring in revenue and it's profitable. Timing's got to be right, personally and market-wise. Is the window of opportunity opening or closing in the market? And you have to have the expertise and be mentally ready for the challenge. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to talk really, really briefly about the business model, because you're going to read about it and learn more about it in this module. So, quick and dirty, business models. It's really simple. It's a little more complicated under the hood, but it's really, really simple at the basic level of understanding is this. It's how a company makes money. A business model describes the way in which a company makes money. And really there's 2 elements. It's the revenue sources, and it's what it costs us to make money. So those cost drivers. So really, really straightforward. And when it comes to business models, we're looking at the revenue side. That's where I'm going to focus. I'm not going to talk about the cost stuff right now. It's what are the sources? You see some examples there: single stream, multiple stream, interdependent, loss leader. And then it's what are the models? Subscription, advertising, membership, unit-based, licensing, transaction fee, those kind of things. Let's use an example of a newspaper. Newspapers have a multiple stream source. Their sources of revenue are multiple streams and multiple stream. And they use the model of things like subscription, the historical real revenue generator for pervasive revenue generator for a newspaper was subscriptions, people subscribing to receive the newspaper every day. But newspapers also sell advertising. If you look at a newspaper, it's got news content, but it's also got lots of advertising. And then historically, they've also sold classifieds, form of advertising. So, they have multiple. Most newspapers have had historically and still have had multiple streams of revenue using subscription and advertising-based models. And there may be some other tweaks that they do, but those are very, very common. If you look at a fitness club, LA Fitness, for example, membership-based, but they also have some unit-based components because they sell nutrition products, they sell fitness products, they sell services through their training sessions and classes and things like that. So you've got multiple streams of revenue. Classic of the transaction fee is eBay. eBay doesn't sell anything. You buy something off of eBay, and eBay is taking a cut of the transaction, so the sale. And up until when they owned PayPal, not only did they take a cut of the sale, but they took a cut of the financial transaction that completed the sale. So they had multiple streams of revenue using a transaction fee based. The classic interdependent model or independent source was the razor and the razor blade. Still is the razor and the razor blade. They give you the razor, you use the blades, and you have to replace the blades. That's a steady stream of unit-based sales that they're bringing in. So that's a real quick look at the business model. You're going to read about it. You're going to immerse yourself in it in this module. So I just want to kind of wet your beak a little bit in that regard. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk about one of the projects you're going to do in this class is the business concept profile. And that's going to be a team-based project, doing a little bit differently than I've done it in the past. The sheer numbers in this class, I think we've got 43 students in this course, makes it tough to manage it. So I'm using a little bit different approach, a team-based approach. So the ideas, the ideation that you've done in Module 2 is being evaluated, and myself and some of our faculty here and some of the team here at the Center for Entrepreneurship looking at your ideas, selecting the ones we think are the most interesting and may have the most potential just from our own perspective. And we're going to then pick the top 8, and then you guys are going to, in teams, work on those to do the concept profile, which is really nothing more than a really quick sizing up of the business concept using the major aspects of the entrepreneurial process. The process includes the team, people, resources, lots to drill down on there. And I liken it to a quick sizing up. You go to a party and you meet somebody, and whether it's you're interested to become a friend, or there's the possibility of romantic interest, or maybe it's a business relationship that you think might possibly blossom from this. You meet somebody at a party and you think there might be some potential there. What do? You size them up. You're trying to see if there's a fit to move things forward, to move things further. And this is essentially what you're doing now, you're going to do with your business concept. We're going to do a quick sizing up of the business concept to see if there's something really, really there. It's sort of like a brief dive into the concept, explore a number of facets of it that can serve as an initial profile that would then help you later do a more intensive deep dive to test some of the assumptions you have about the product, the customer, the market, all that good stuff. I don't want to sell it as simple. I think it's simpler than doing a full-scale lean startup approach or an all-in startup approach or a full feasibility analysis. It's like going on a couple of dates, as opposed to dating somebody for several months before you decide this is the person I want to have a serious relationship with. Again, quicker sizing up, not as intensive, but I don't want to sell it as overly simple and not a lot of work, because it's still a lot of work. It still requires a lot of effort to do this project. And I think there's a real value in doing it and doing it as well as you possibly can. So simpler, not simple, and intensive, but less intensive than some of the more full-scale approaches that I would normally deploy in like a 10-week course where we have much more time to do a deeper dive into the business concept. So, and I will be sharing a little bit more detail on this project in writing as well, and providing you with a full template to actually do this project. Last, before I wrap up, this startup failed. Why? I think that's a really interesting question. Startups fail for a lot of reasons. Part of the entrepreneurial process is understanding failure. And I think this concept of what we call a pre-mortem is really, really powerful. We do post-mortems for people when they pass away. If we're not sure why they died, autopsy will tell you the likely cause of death. And we could do that with businesses too. There's actually a really cool website called autopsy.io, I think, that analyzes failed businesses. Very interesting reading. But for you, postmortem does you no good except to inform your next startup. And while that can be a good thing, you've learned from what you failed on. Why don't we try and do what most good entrepreneurs do, which is minimize the risk? Good entrepreneurs, are consummate risk minimizers. They take risks. And in fact, the risks they take often seem large to people outside of the entrepreneurial realm, but oftentimes they're very minimized risks. They've done a lot of shaping of the opportunity. They've done a lot of detective work. You know, entrepreneurs are not fortune tellers. They're detectives. They do the due diligence in a particular way to find out how to create a business that has more likelihood of success. And so this startup failed. Why? Well, let's do a pre-mortem. Let's think about why a business might fail before it fails. Now, I know what you're saying. I can almost hear you saying it right now. Yes, I think I did hear somebody say it. I've heard it from students before. Mike, how could you bring up such a blasphemous concept into this class? Entrepreneurship is about being positive. It's about being optimistic. It's about success. It's about seeing what can go right. I agree. But I think we're being Pollyannish if we ignore the fact that businesses fail in large number, and that maybe one of the tools at our disposal could be to think. I know, it's shocking, to think about what could possibly go wrong. Risk minimizer, detective. Let's think about that. Let's ideate. Let's use our creativity to ideate about our business. Let's look out a year from now and assume that our business, I know it's we have a great idea and we're all awesome, but let's assume it failed. Oh, powerful stuff. Why did it fail? Let's come up with the reasons. Let's ideate. Let's get creative. What are all the possible scenarios that could have led this thing to go in the toilet? Now, I think that's powerful stuff. And I don't think it's being negative. I think it's being smart. Now I'm biased, obviously, but I think that's a cool way to look at it, to say, let's do a pre-mortem. Let's do the post-mortem now. And maybe what we learn in doing the pre-mortem helps us avoid the landmines, helps us avoid the mistakes, helps us avoid the roadblocks, gives us better insight into what could possibly be a challenge for us in the future. We won't predict the future. We're not fortune tellers, but we're detectives. And we're going to see if we can do a little detective work around doing business concept profiles, dating a little bit, asking those questions, and then thinking about, this thing could go south. What could make it go south? I wonder. So that's the pre-mortem. You'll read about it. I think that's it for the introduction to Module 3. I've probably thrown enough at you. We're closing in on 45 minutes of time. Hopefully you didn't get bored. And if you did, or you fell asleep, guess what? You can replay this. That's the great thing about this. Or if you got bored, you could stop the video, and go have a snack, have a beer, some kind of adult beverage. Sometimes our best work is, we've had just a little lubrication. So Module 3, enjoy the module. If you have any questions, let me know. Look for more information coming from me, and I will talk to you again in Module 4.